see it right around 11. Preparing it now. All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Friday Live. I'm super excited to bring you my guest today. I have Ryan Embree with me. He's the head of partnerships at Practice Ignition. So I know this is going to be an awesome session. If anyone has questions throughout it, be sure to comment down below. And if you're watching this after the replay, then you can still comment your questions. Myself or Ryan will make sure that they get answered. But with further ado, Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Katie. I think really excited to get in front of your audience, because I know you talk about a lot of technology solutions and just ultimately running firms more efficiently. So Practice Ignition, our kind of story, does tie in with a lot of the content I've seen you put out. So really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, if you want to kick it off and tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you got started with Practice Ignition, I think that'd be a great place for us to start.
Definitely. So I'm actually not an accountant by background, but I came across Practice Ignition actually in the early days of the company. About 5 years ago, I was traveling in Australia, and actually, while finishing school, started an internship with them over in Australia when the product was just kind of coming out to market. So I think what I'll kind of touch on a bit more is about the history of PI and kind of how it came to be. So back then I met Guy Pearson, who founded Practice Ignition. So Guy is an accountant by background. He founded his own accounting firm back in 2009. Back then, this whole notion of cloud, managing your clients online, wasn't really as big as it is today. But he kind of saw where the future of the market was going. I think he will admit, he was a younger millennial type, was kind of sick of working in a larger firm and thought, I could kind of do things better on my own. So he started his own firm back then in 2009 and kind of decided from day one, every client was going to go on, back then being in Australia, he picked Xero as his main accounting system that he worked with, but also, taking clients on other accounting systems as well. But he wanted everyone to be managed online, so he could, manage them. He wouldn't have to go on site. So he was able to grow that firm pretty well. So he grew it from 0 clients up to over 1,000 in the course of 7 years. A lot of that was, a few reasons that kind of helped that growth. I think first would be he really optimized the tech. So he, back in 2009, he had live chat on his website. He had all of his clients on online accounting systems. He was filing their tax online. So he was really ahead of the game, early user of applications like Receipt Bank and Spotlight, and some of the reporting solutions. So he was really focused on tech from day one, building out that tech stack. And I would say the second reason that firm was really successful back then was the ability to market the firm. So he knew back then that he wanted to, differentiate himself from the other firms in Australia. So he wanted to pick a niche, and he decided to pick startups, private equity firms, and their surrounding entities. So he wanted to be known as the accountant for startups, basically, in Australia. So in his early days, he really did build a lot of his marketing and materials around that niche in order to bring on those types of clients. So yeah, basically over the course of time, he was growing his firm pretty quickly. And I think scaling a services business in general can just be very difficult. When you bring on a new client, that means you need more work and you need more people to do that. So kind of with that growth, bringing on 10 or 20 clients per month, he did kind of hit some bottlenecks. And I think the kind of glaringly obvious one he was hitting was around that proposal process with his clients. So, every time he had a new client come on board, he had to go through the same manual process of going into a Word doc, finding and replacing that, and then sending off a Word doc to his clients. And then kind of that waiting game of them to get back to him. And then, once he got that back, it was then, how are we going to do this work? And then lastly, how are we going to get paid? So I think that's one thing that Practice Ignition solved for is, linking that proposal engagement letter process to the payment, so they're not two separate things. So ultimately, in the growth of interactive accounting, Guy realized, he kind of begged every software vendor out there to build what he wanted with Practice Ignition. no one did. So he decided actually to leave his accounting firm to start Practice Ignition. So, everything we've built was with the accountant or bookkeeper firm owner in mind. That's kind of where we came from initially. Is that an okay background on that? Any questions?
That's an awesome background. I think it really hits home what problem Practice Ignition solves and why it came to be. So something I have a question about is Practice Ignition something that only accountants and bookkeepers can use, or are you guys also having the accountant and bookkeeper sell or have recommend Practice Ignition to their clients as well?
Yep. So I think definitely us being, founded by an accountant, we kind of know the accounting industry well. So we know where the accountants go, we know how to get in front of them. But what we're starting to see, as kind of we're in year 5 of the company really kind of being to market, is that working with accountants, we see a lot of them saying, they send a proposal to their client in professional services generally will say, this is really great. What application is this? Can I use it? So we are starting to see a lot of referrals directly from accountants to their clients. And now kind of as we're just becoming a bit more known, we're finding some professional service firms just find us on their own without an accountant, which is great. So yeah, a lot of this stuff was initially built for that accounting firm, but I think just in general, it was problems that professional service firms are facing. I think one thing Guy noticed, in his accounting firm was he was working with, e-commerce sellers, and it's really easy for them to sell their products online. They can use something like a Shopify to sell, t-shirts or hats or whatever that might be on the internet. He was working with SaaS companies who can, set up Stripe or Recurly to set up their automatic billings for subscriptions. But being in services, there wasn't really a good way to do that. So I think that's when he noticed that there's kind of a disconnect, and there's really a big need for the broader industry of professional services to have that system to make it basically easier to sell your services online.
Yeah, totally. And do you all see there being a certain size firm that Practice Ignition really seems to just be the fit for? Or are there some pretty small firms, some larger firms?
Yep.
What size of firm should be looking at Practice Ignition?
Yeah. So I mean, we've got we've definitely got a scale on. We've got a bunch of people that are sole practitioners, one man band type firms. And I think ultimately those on the smaller end of firms, it's a pretty good tool when you're getting started. So you just have one system to begin with. And also, you kind of get back a lot of time in some of that administrative tasks. So if you are the same person that's doing the selling, you're the one doing the service, you're the one doing the client meetings, any kind of time savings you can get, and especially around that manual process of creating invoices, chasing payments, creating engagement letters. I think smaller firms see the benefit in that for sure. A couple larger firms like top 100 size firms starting to use it on that end, but not, I would say, just not really an ideal fit currently. If you think a lot of those firms, I think, are just a bit slower adopting in terms of tech. Generally, we use a desktop-based project practice management system. I would say the firms that really adopt and get on well is any firm under 50 staff, in that range of 100 to almost 1,000 clients. It's a decent range, but under 50 staff, I think we see really adopt the platform pretty easily and have a okay time kind of switching clients over. So I'd say that's generally right now with those firms that we see getting the most out of the system.
Awesome. Yeah, you were talking about some of the larger firms, and it's interesting because my background is at one of the big four firms, and don't even get me into billing, how much work that was, but getting the proposal drafted and there was always the standard language. A few things were tweaked, but getting that drafted, getting it sent up the chain of approval to make sure that, every single of our standard language was checked and drafted right. The names were put in right. And then actually sending it and getting it signed and getting that PDF copy back. It was such a long process. So it's crazy how the little firms are seeing Practice Ignition, and some the mid-sized ones are seeing it, they're latching on and really getting these benefits where the bigger ones are behind. What's the process like if I am a firm owner and I come to you and I say, hey, I want to start using Practice Ignition? How long does it take from the time they create an account with you guys to really be using Practice Ignition and getting, the full benefits from it?
Yeah. So I think it's, kind of time dependent too of what time of year you're coming on board and, what your availability is. I think definitely, you can self-service in a lot of ways. You can go to the application, you can create an account, you can set up your services. We do have a team though that helps in those first 90 days. We call that our customer success team. So I think generally what we aim for is in those first 90 days, again, people are always busy, there's always a tax deadline, but how can we, make sure you can get, at least your first 10 clients on, and then from there that you feel comfortable to switch your whole client base across. I think also coming towards the end of the year, we do see a lot of firms, we've just finished the last tax deadline. Now it's time to actually start thinking about 2020. So we see a lot of firms kind of looking at us now, November, December, because come December, January, it's time to get those engagement letters out for the new year. So it is kind of a good natural time to look to switch the process over from whatever that old way you're doing things in order to get the client base across. But so yeah, definitely when you do sign up for practice ignition, you'll have a dedicated member from our team to work with you on the training, just to make sure everything's configured right and you actually know how to use it. So yeah, that's generally the process of getting going.
That's awesome. And just for anyone watching this, I'm a huge fan of Practice Ignition. Have a lot of firms that are using it already, or they come to me and I help them set it up. It's an awesome tool. So I'm trying to ask questions that I know that get asked to me. But another question I know that's really popular whenever firms are evaluating Practice Ignition is, how does it work for billing for services that aren't recurring? Can Practice Ignition still serve those particular clients?
Yep. So within the application, I'll get to this. I'll show it in the demo a bit later on. But I would say generally, if you are billing on recurring services or upfront services or fixed price services generally, you'll be able to get all your clients over on those billing types really easily. In terms of hourly or estimate billing, you can send a proposal on an estimate and then push an invoice and payment after the fact. We don't handle time tracking within Practice Ignition, so that's generally still handled outside of Practice Ignition. But I would say if you are billing all of your clients on an hourly basis every month, it might not be the best fit. I think generally if we talk trends in the accounting industry though, I think a lot more firms are moving towards some sort of fixed fee value pricing methodology. So, you're providing value on a monthly basis, charging your clients on a fixed fee. We have ways to help with scope creep too. So I think some firms are hesitant to move to fixed fee billing or value pricing because they're worried that, what happens if it goes out of scope? What happens if, I end up spending way more time? We do have the ability to kind of adjust and amend and add in more ad hoc components. So I think if you are still kind of on that time cost billing model, but looking to start switching some clients over, it can really help with that process too, because within Practice Ignition, you do have to start to productize your service offerings in a sense. So it can be a mindset change in some ways. So it's no longer just what's my hourly rate, but it's what are all the different things we do in the firm. Do we do bookkeeping? Do we do payroll? Do we do training and implementation of software? Do we do tax? So kind of having all of those different offerings within the application.
Yeah, totally. It's very powerful. So do you have some case studies that you could share with us to talk a little bit about maybe what a firm was experiencing before they implemented Practice Ignition and then what they got out of using Practice Ignition?
Cool. I'm just going to pull them up and then I'll share my screen once those are up. Let me get it in the right tab. Cool. And then I think I should be able to share, right? Yep.
Yes.
So this one here is with Lance CPA Group. Josh Lance runs his own firm out of Chicago. He actually has a fully remote team though. So I think the main reason Josh initially came to Practice Ignition is this notion around those engagement letters going out at tax season. So before Practice Ignition, what he was doing was, manually creating Word documents for all of these tax clients. So he has both business and individual clients, but he'd send them out. He'd then kind of wait for them, kind of track them down in his email inbox, and then try to figure out who signed. And then the next piece was getting paid. So he would do all his billings after the returns got completed. But I think with a lot of firms that do that, it's, you complete the return, maybe you complete it in April, maybe do an extension, but you send the invoice and, you're chasing that client down for the rest of the year to get them to pay off that invoice. So I think the big thing that Josh noticed when he switched to Practice Ignition was, I can send this afterwards. It's not looking too well here, but if people do want to see this, I can maybe just put a link in after. But the big thing he got was just the time savings. So was able to, make sure it was taking a staff member, almost a month a year to do this. Basically got that time back. And then also ensuring they were getting paid for the work as well. So hence we're linking that payment in directly too. One more case study I can pull up. What is that one? I would say this is more on a smaller firm with Mile High bookkeeping services. So in Cindy's firm, she was doing basically all the administrative work in her firm. So she was doing all the billings every month. So she was saying that was per client, that was taking her upwards of 2 hours per month, because she'd have to do the work. Then, if she was billing on time, figure out her time, then send the invoices to the clients, and then, chase their payments. So we can see that in that time savings, it can be upwards of 2 hours per client per month, and just getting those engagements out. And then the billing aspect too, which is if you're, using just a manual accounts receivable process of creating invoices and then waiting on clients to pay.
That's perfect. That's so helpful. And I think it's great for everyone watching this to think about how they can improve their proposal and payment collection process, especially getting ready to enter a new crazy busy season for all of us accountants out there. So thank you, Ryan, for sharing those. I think this would be the perfect time to go ahead and show Practice Ignition so it's a little bit more tangible to everyone watching.
Absolutely. I've just got my demo account here. So just in a demo account now, what I want to show is basically what makes up a proposal first. So I mentioned before, you have that library of services, you have that list of the different offerings you have. This is actually a standard service library that comes within your account when you create one. So it's got everything from accounting services to payroll to tax. And if you click into a service, so in this case, it's my 1120C corporate tax return. You can see there's some deliverables to that. So what will you do? And then there's a default billing type and price. So when you go to create a proposal, you're just pulling from that library to select which of those services you'll be performing. Another kind of best practice we see within libraries is services that have different limitations to them. So if you're doing something like bookkeeping, not just having one service called bookkeeping, but maybe having small, medium, large, same thing on payroll, maybe you're having by range of number of employees. And lastly, what we see in service libraries too is people kind of adding in their software subscriptions. So if you are an accountant or bookkeeper and you're managing clients, maybe it's your QuickBooks or Xero or Gusto subscriptions, actually being able to charge your clients through Practice Ignition to collect off those subscriptions as well. So that's another thing we see within service libraries. So you've got services, and then you've also got your engagement letter template. So we talked kind of before about what that old way might be doing. Katie, you talked about your experiences of having to go through those templates when you were in practice. So what this shows here is how our templates work. So everything uses what we call placeholders. So that pulls in kind of those dynamic components that you have to change every time. So the contact name, the date, their address. But what we also pull across is the specific services. So based on the services that you have and the pricing, those pull through automatically. So that's the service summary and the price summary there. So that's where your template is. What we do a part of setup too. So if you were interested in getting going, I know a lot of people have, you might be a part of a certain state society or AICPA or whatever group it is. You might have your own engagement letter terms that you want. We can actually take what you've got in a Word doc or any other template and load it into Practice Ignition to help you with that initial setup process of getting it in here. So that's kind of the main components of getting started. So you mentioned earlier, what does it look like to get started? It's kind of building out that service library, building out your engagement letter templates, so you can then actually start sending out proposals. So what I want to show now is what that process would look like to send a proposal off to a client. and what that would look like to them. Really what we want to get at here is, the time savings. So if you think of what you're doing currently, maybe you have a certain proposal application that you use, or maybe you do this all in Word documents or Google Docs or PowerPoints, but kind of just seeing how this might vary and automate some things after it gets signed. So the first step is you add in your client. We can pull that from a client list, or if it is a brand new client, we can add them in right away. The next step is laying out the start and end date. So kind of what are the contracted terms for this client? What we can then do is do a renewal or a scope change once we hit that end date. What we've got the ability here to do as well is upload a marketing brochure. So we had some feedback that people wanted their proposals to look a bit better, have more images involved. So what we allow you to do now is actually attach a marketing brochure to be included in your proposals. The next step here is services. So pulling in from your library which service that client's going to receive. And again, that service library can be completely customizable. So if you've got this hashed out elsewhere, our sample services aren't what you do, you can always create your own services. So we add those in. It pulls in those deliverables. It pulls across that price. We can change that if need be. So you can really custom price per the client. It has a bill type too, so that informs how we go ahead and create invoices and collect payments off that. So recurring would be that monthly fixed fee. What we can add in here though is multiple services and multiple services of different billing types. So maybe we do some sort of training services. We could use our on acceptance bill type, would actually collect payment up front as soon as they accept. So we'd save that off. We can also add in an on completion service. So maybe we wanted to build this once we complete the work. Back to that notion of hourly work too. So if you did want an estimate service, you can just give it that estimate hourly rate and then push the invoice and payment once you complete the work based on the time. So pretty flexible to whatever billing arrangement you might want to set up with your clients. Terms is an engagement letter template. So just pulling from an existing library that you might have, or that library that we showed earlier. The messaging tab, so this does allow you to add some personal component to it. So quick message here. In terms of payments, so this is where our payment gateway is turned on. You just connect directly to your bank account, and that's where we collect and disperse those funds to. We've got the ability to collect both off ACH and credit card. You can, if you don't want to take card payments, perhaps you could turn that off, and vice versa with ACH. In terms of why a lot of people do switch to us for payments is that notion of requiring payment. So they can't accept our proposal until they put their payment details in. Again, I think one of the questions you had from me earlier was, why do you have your proposal and payment system in one? Again, it's just one less thing you have to set up, one less thing you're gonna have to chase down. So if we can get their payment details when they're accepting the proposal, we're not gonna have to worry about manually creating invoices or chasing payments later on. So that's the creation process there. So again, tried to go a bit slower through it too, but again, once everything's templated in the account, it shouldn't take that long to get one of these out. So what I just did then is hit send to client. So that sends an email to whoever the contact is. I'm just going to pull up what that link is that they would get in their email. So the end client would get an email. In that email, they get a link to this page. So that left side here is a marketing brochure. So if you did want to include some branding, we can actually help you create one of those. There's an application called Canva that we use where we can actually create a marketing brochure for you when you get started. So that's really can help the look and feel of these proposals. The right side here then is going to be a message from the sender, a summary of the services. So what are the services we're doing? A schedule of payment. So how do we want to bill those services? Is it upfront, recurring, estimate? This is where we collect those payment details. So the end client will just connect directly to their bank here, or they can input card details. And then lastly, that engagement letter pulls through. So as you can see, this kind of pulled in from that template that we showed before. So the client name, the dates, the specific services we selected, the pricing schedule, they all pulled through. And then we just get a digital signature at the bottom. So the client's signing off and accepting. So that's the main flow of create, send, sign, accept. Again, everything's pulling from our libraries. So it's just kind of selecting which services the client gets and then sending it off so they sign off. Just one thing to show is how those invoices and payments do flow moving forward. So what you'll see here is we actually would start collecting automatically for any upfront services. So if you had that service billed on acceptance, we'd go ahead and collect that. Mentioned before how we'd handle hourly billing. So let's say we wanted to bill this based on time. We would just put in, whatever the quantity of hours was in the rate at the end. So maybe it was 8 hours at, $100 an hour. We'd say invoice for the selected services. And if this collect payment toggle is turned on, it would collect payment as well. So I showed, creating a proposal within the account. One other feature we have that actually people don't always know about is our website connector or web connector. So what this allows you to do is actually embed Practice Ignition into a website or a web page. So if on your website you want to list your services or packages, I think sometimes people have varying views on whether they do want this public or not. But if you do want your services offered on the website, we do have a plugin that can pull directly in to your site. I would say the benefits of setting up on your website would be, this doesn't have to be the final prices your clients get, but it just kind of ranges. And also if, our base plan's $300 a month and someone doesn't feel comfortable paying that, then maybe it's not a good fit and we can actually save some time in that sales process going forward. So the way the plugin works is this green button here is actually Practice Ignition taking over. So if someone came to the website, they would select that button, they'd put in their name, email, phone number, business name. We could then have additional add-on services that they could self-select. And then from there, they would hit submit. This is actually someone's live website, so I'm not going to hit submit. But what that does then is back in Practice Ignition, it creates a proposal in draft. It notifies you had someone come in through the website. So, it could just kind of prepare you to go into that initial sales call or sales meeting. You know what they're looking for. You can tweak and modify it and then ultimately speed up the time it takes to get them signed on. One feature I do want to highlight too is our dashboard. So ultimately, when Guy was building Practice Ignition 2, one of the things he wanted was more visibility into how he was actually performing as a firm. So what this shows here is since we have the clients you have under contract and we know what services they're taking up and we know what you're charging them, we can show you in each month what your committed revenue is each month. And we can also segment off there, what might be recurring versus a project revenue. So you can know if you were switching to more recurring, you can know that. But maybe we have a whole bunch of project work come tax season. You can kind of just budget and plan for that accordingly with what pulls through to the dashboard. We'd also see our pipeline. So maybe we're in that process of bringing on some new clients. We can see sent and accepted proposals, and then revenue per service. So based on our services here, what's actually bringing in which percentage of our revenue. So ultimately, the whole point of the dashboard is just to surface up some insights to hopefully help you make better decisions to run your firm. One thing I want to touch on too is integrations. So Practice Ignition, you can use it standalone, but we also can connect to other applications. So in terms of direct integration, we can connect directly to, once this loads, QuickBooks Online and Xero in terms of general ledger cloud accounting software. We can connect to a couple workflow tools, so Carbon and Xero Practice Manager as well. And then the other one I want to touch on is Zapier. So Zapier is becoming more and more popular with a bunch of applications. And what you can do with Zapier is basically set up your own integrations between two cloud-based applications. So here's some examples of some of the other applications on Zapier. I think there's over 1,000, but most CRMs, most email marketing systems, a lot of project or task management systems are on here too. So even if you're using other applications that aren't directly connected to Practice Ignition, you could use Zapier to kind of fill those gaps and make sure the data is pushing from one system to the other. Just a couple examples of what some of our clients do is setting up a trigger for when your proposals get accepted, and then doing certain actions after that. So posting a message to the team in Slack, perhaps to notify them that we got a new proposal signed. If you're using something like an Asana or Trello to manage projects or tasks, creating tasks automatically. Perhaps you want to add them into an email marketing system, so something like a MailChimp. So just our team can work with you too. So again, if you're not using any of those other applications, that's fine. But I think as you look to build out your kind of app stack of what you're using in your firm, and trying to connect some of those two together can ultimately and be another time savings for you. I'll stop there. Katie, anything else you want me? I know I kind of rambled on for a bit there, but hopefully it is a bit clear on that stuff I was talking earlier and how it actually does look in the application. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that, Ryan.
You're fine.
So I think that was a super awesome overview. One thing that might be helpful to just dive a tiny bit deeper on is the integration with QuickBooks and Xero,
Yep.
just what information is passed along.
Exactly. So initially what we do is when you're creating a proposal, we'll pull across your clients that are already linked to your QBO or Xero. So when you're going to create a proposal and you start typing, you could see any ones that would be mapped automatically there. So on the other side too, in terms of your services, so the way the integration works at its core is when proposals get accepted, we then create invoices based on the schedule that's laid out in that proposal. So an on acceptance invoice, we'd create that right away. If payments are turned on, we'd go collect that payment. So then the invoice and payment can match up. So in this case, we'd create an invoice with the line item of training services, software setup and training of 600, either in QuickBooks Online or Xero. And you can always click through to view where those invoices get created there. In terms of the mapping of those, under your service library, what you can do is actually map those to a specific service in QBO, or in Xero, you can map that to your chart of accounts if you do want those invoices getting created in a certain place in your ledger. So that's how that mapping works. I think the big thing that with those integrations is we don't push anything until you get a signed proposal, because we don't want to be pushing leads into your accounting system. So we only want to push through people that become on as active. So you can still have someone in here that's kind of a lead status, but once they do sign, that's when that gets triggered off.
Awesome. I think that was perfect. So as far as next steps go, if someone wants to check out Practice Ignition, what would their next steps be?
Yep. So what you can do, I think best our website can give you a pretty good hand on where's next. So it's probably going to inevitably come up. So I'll just touch on it first as pricing. So how much does the application cost? So there's a few different plans here. Basically, the whole point of the plans is just to be variant for the size of the firm or business that's using it. So the first plan is a starter plan that gives you up to 25 what we call active clients. An active client is someone you've sent a proposal to, they've accepted, and we're actively billing. After that then comes the professional plan, which gives you up to 250 active clients, and that's $149 a month. In the scale and above that, we generally would do custom plans if it's a much larger firm than that. So those are general plans. The other thing is in terms of our payments rates. So since we process payments, we charge the fees to you based on your collections. So they start at $2.9 on card and they go down as you go up the plan. So the higher the plan, the cheaper the rates. And here on ACH, it starts at $1 and goes down to 70 cents. One thing to note with this is we actually will collect and disperse the full amounts of your payments that you're collecting from your clients. That way we can reconcile payments to invoices, and then we'll charge you your fees based on the volume you processed in the previous month. So that's our pricing plans. Again, if you wanted to, I'm happy to talk through, maybe what plan might be best. If someone did have more questions, we also do annual billing too. So if you paid for the year, you can save a bit up front. In terms of getting started, you can actually go directly from the website to create a trial. Once you're on trial, then trial's fully functional outside of collecting a payment. So if you did want to actually get in and start collecting payments from your clients, you would have to subscribe. You do get help from our team along the way. So even when you get a trial, someone from our team will reach out to help you make sure everything's configured correctly. And then once you sign on, you'll have someone to work with you to make sure that you can send out those first proposals pretty easily as well.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to link Practice Ignition information below.
Cool.
One final question is, in terms of getting paid, how long from the time you guys collect the fees to disbursement?
Got it. So That one, there is a bit of a delay. So on cards, it's 2 business days. On ACH, it's 7 business days. I would say it's just to kind of know when that cash is going to hit. So kind of at the mercy of the ACH system in terms of dispersals. But I think ultimately, if you think you might have a lag on collecting the payments, but if they're coming automatically and you know when they're going to hit, then that's ultimately a win. And also kind of the elimination of that accounts receivable process. So it was interesting. I was actually at an event, a Xero event, and they said that the average accounting firm has $19,000 in accounts receivable based on their like anonymized data. So it's really interesting. Like we can see firms that can basically get that pretty close to zero when you set your clients up on automatic payments. So I think there is that lag on the dispersal times, but ultimately thinking about the end output of you're no longer going to be chasing payments, and you have that peace of mind that the payments are coming. Can ultimately outweigh that in a lot of ways and make it better.
Completely. Well, I think this was awesome. If anyone has any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments. And like I said, myself or Ryan will get back with you. But overall, I think that this was really awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I know our viewers do too.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. If anyone wants to connect, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn, Ryan Embree. Also on Twitter, ignition_Ryan, and Ryan@practiceignition.com is my email. So if anyone has further questions or wants to talk more or just connect in general, feel free to reach out.
Hey, that was going to be my next question is where can
people...
You read my mind. That's perfect.
Yes.
So thank you. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone who's watching. Be sure to tune in next Friday for the next Friday Live and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thanks a lot, Katie. Have a good weekend.